Hi, I'm Malika Bilal in for Femi OK, and you're in the stream. Today, nearly 30% of the world's population is overweight. But why? Is it unhealthy foods, lack of exercise, or does it come down to just one ingredient? Take a look.
Sugar is now found in 80% of the foods we eat.
The point is to test out a very high sugar diet.
How are you going to do that?
If you want to match averages, 40 teaspoons of sugar a day.
40 a day.
But they must be hidden sugars found in commonly perceived healthy foods and drinks. So no soft drink, confectionery or ice cream.
People on this planet are growing sicker every day. And many scientists now believe that fructose has a role to play.
Well, that was a trailer from That Sugar film, where one filmmaker documents the effects of a high sugar diet on a healthy body. Even though global rates of obesity are rising, more than 2 billion people don't get the energy they need from the food they consume. Why? Well, experts blame sugar, and as you just saw, it's pumped into almost every single item we consume. Foods rich in sugar don't fill you up, satiate your appetite, nor give you the nutrition you need. It's also addictive, leaving you with a short spike of energy and hungrier than before. Quick and cheap junk foods are loaded with the stuff. Now, before we go any further, I do want to point out that we reached out to several food industry officials, but were turned down. They do deny many of these claims. The topic of this show was inspired by a discussion that came up in our fat shaming show just last Monday from our community. And with me is digital producer Omar Badar. He'll explain.
Yep, we sure were talking about fat shaming, and we had somebody in our community who thought that the conversation should have moved in another direction. We have Michael, who tweeted in then saying it definitely ignores the larger sociocultural conditions that led to weight gain, such as unhealthy food, and pretty much everybody who was part of that conversation agreed that this basically deserves a show of its own, which is the one that we're doing right now. Folks, you can join this conversation by tweeting us using the hashtag AJStream.
Hi, my name is Eric O'Gray. I'm a vegan and health advocate, and I'm in the stream.
Joining us on the program, Gary Taubes is co-founder of the Nutrition Science Initiative and author of the book, Why We Get Fat and What to Do About It. Brooke Barnett is a blogger and recovering sugar addict. Ishi Khosla is a clinical nutritionist and founder of The Weight Monitor, a weight management portal. And Dr. Malcolm Kendrick is a physician and writer. Welcome everyone to the stream. Now, Brooke, I want to start with you. You describe yourself as a recovering sugar addict. What did that look like in practice?
Absolutely. So I've struggled with obesity most of my life, starting from about the age of 5. And when I realized that I was addicted to sugar was when I had entered recovery for an eating disorder that was a result of my obesity. So up until then, I didn't really think that I had a problem with sugar because I don't eat a lot of sweet foods. Those aren't my preferences. But I started realizing when I tried to stop eating sugar and moderate the amount of sugar in my diet, looking at the packages, that it was in everything. And so for me, it was just a matter of educating myself. It's super confusing, the idea of sugar being in everything and moderation. And so I found that I was unable to moderate. And so that's what led me to trying to eliminate it completely from my diet. And that's when changes started happening. I stopped having to obsess about my weight and my body, and I started losing weight naturally. And I just felt a lot clearer and less controlled by food.
You know, it's interesting you said, Brooke, super confusing, and that pretty much describes how I felt this weekend doing the research for the show, because sugar has 56 different names that we know of that it is labeled on food. So I want you to take a look at this list. You have dextrose, you have corn syrup solids, fructose. Dr. Kendrick, Malcolm, these names are ones that maybe your average person may not recognize. What is it that these things actually do to us once we ingest them? What is that effect that sugar has on us?
Well, I think the first thing is, I mean, sugar does come in many different forms. I don't think it can get very complicated and people call them all sorts of different things. What people think of sugar, table sugar, But of course, what the body sees when it eats anything like carbohydrate, it sees a potato. You see a potato, your body just smashes it to pieces and turns it essentially into glucose, which is the commonest sugar that we eat. Fructose you can find in fruit. Now, there's a lot of people who believe that the fruit sugars, the fructose, are worse for us than any other type of sugar. The evidence can be quite complicated, but essentially, when we say sugar, we're saying it's a form of carbohydrate. Our body just doesn't really care what form it gets it in. It just wants to turn it into glucose, and then the glucose gets into our liver, and the liver turns glucose, if we have too much of it, straight into fat. And therein lies the problem. The actual process is very straightforward. We eat a lot of sugar, our insulin levels go up. That forces the liver to turn the sugar into fat. The fat is then stored in fat cells, and with the insulin levels high, it's very difficult for the fat to come back out. So we have almost just a one-directional process going on here. Clearly, it's a little more complicated than that, but that's a simple way of looking at it.
So we have people online who are talking about the addiction part of this. We have Nafia here who says food addiction is a nasty habit which is proving hard to eradicate. Even if I am in class, at times I've skipped class just to eat. And then we have Frank here who says food addiction is real. You can be addicted to anything delicious. But Ishi, we're not just talking about stuff that tastes so good we just can't get enough of it because it's tasty. Sugar addiction goes beyond that. Is that right?
Oh, absolutely. And sugar actually helps in production. It's a simple form of carbohydrate, as was just mentioned, and it actually creates a formation of serotonin in the brain. And so it's not only a taste, it's one of the 4 important taste buds that we have. So it helps the taste to get satisfied at the tongue level, but then at the brain level, it creates the formation of serotonin, which really gives you a very calming and happy feeling. And that is one of the reasons perhaps why we turn to sugar when we are stressed or we are unhappy or we are tired. So in fact, as we call what the HALT, when you're hungry, angry, lonely, and tired. So it's when you're out of sorts, you seek sugar to comfort you. And the other mechanism perhaps by which it is making it a desirable and a pleasurable food is its ability to turn on the opioid centers in the brain. And these are typically, the centers where your drugs create the stimulation. So they have found that sugar does exactly the same thing in much more powerful ways than even drugs. So perhaps the addictive nature is linked to this mechanism. So, from the tongue to the brain and then to the metabolism, and it does create metabolic imbalances,
Right.
and the metabolic imbalances cause sugar spikes and sugar lows, and that imbalanced sugar leads to cravings.
Right.
And that leads to some other unpleasant
And
metabolic
Ishi, as you're talking,
disorders.
I can see Gary reacting. Gary, jump in here. This is exactly what you're studying. This is what you write about.
Well, this is what's interesting about sugar. It's not just, it does have these effects in the part of our brain called the food reward system that are very similar to other drugs of abuse, nicotine, morphine, heroin, cocaine. They all work in this particular point of the brain. But one of the things about sugar is because it's also a nutrient, and because we respond to it so immediately, it's the only one of these substances that we would give to infants. So we start giving sugar to children at, traditionally 1 year old. And so we addict, if it's addictive, and my favorite line on that is an author friend of mine, Charles Mann, who said scientists like to debate whether it's addictive or people just act like it is. But we start kids so early that by the time children are, 5, 10 years old, they are used to very few foods that don't have sugar in them, as Brooke pointed out. And then what we do is we make sure that every aspect of life is celebrated by sugar. Birthdays are celebrated by sugar. Christmas is celebrated. Every holiday.
What would a holiday be
you can
without
imagine.
something sweet? It just seems normal.
Yes.
Well, and how would we communicate our love without giving our children something sweet? So everything gets, sugar becomes so integrated into all aspects of our life. And what we forget is that this wasn't always the case. Up till the 19th century, it was relatively difficult and expensive to get sugar. And the diseases we're talking about, diabetes, obesity, heart disease, potentially cancer, even Alzheimer's. They're all diseases that, for the most part, were very rare until the 20th century. So that's one of the reasons why we, those of us who are afraid of sugar are afraid, because there's a lot of evidence that it does indeed cause these diseases.
So we have people. We have people here online who are talking about how sometimes we're visually deceived, over who's eating healthy and who's not. We have Wolfram here who says the focus on obesity is driven by mythology. The real issue is metabolic disease. 70% of non-obese population can be classified as TOFI. That's an acronym for thin on the outside, but fat on the inside. Ishi, I want to throw this to you. Somebody could actually not be overweight, but still be addicted to sugar and eating very unhealthy, and that does have negative consequences for them. Is that right?
Yes, totally. So it's not only a question of body weight. Like we were talking about the metabolic issues, there are also digestive issues, and sugar can also cause dysbiosis, and it can create, the gut, it can change the gut flora, which can actually create a very unhealthy gut, which means we may perhaps not we may not pick up the nutrients that our body would actually want to pick up. So malnutrition, in fact, this gut health issue is quite a new issue, and it's an emerging area where there could be malabsorption because of food intolerances and perhaps the wrong kind of foods and excessive sugar. And it's a very vicious cycle. So if you actually don't pick up your nutrients, which are important for metabolism, and typically the ones which are important for sugar metabolism are, magnesium, calcium, zinc, and chromium. And these, if you're in shortage, you are likely to suffer more cravings. So it's like a vicious cycle, and you can have more insulin resistance, and that's so an unhealthy gut, which is created simply by sugar, is a huge problem. And when you feel low and you feel you're malnourished, you also, again, like I said, you seek sugar and you seek comfort. So it's like one vicious cycle. But having said that, I would also like to add that,
you're saying that, and so Brooke is reacting because she knows exactly what you mean. Brooke, go ahead.
Absolutely. All of those things are super important to be aware of, but I want to jump back a little bit to how invasive sugar is in our culture and how it's in every aspect of everything we do. So that's what makes sugar addiction so insidious and so difficult to deal with is, first you have to actually identify and accept that you are addicted to sugar. But then on top of that, then you go out into the world, and everywhere you go and everything you do has sugar involved. And it's so accepted and so a part of our culture that it gets really confusing. It's like, well, is this really bad for me? Is this really causing me problems if everyone else is eating it and they're not obese? And I think that needs to change in our culture in order for people to really look at the more detailed aspects of it. It's a very, very basic thing of being in everything.
And Brooke, as you were talking, I saw Malcolm nod his head. So Malcolm, in addition to what Brooke was saying, I think a lot of times, and I speak for myself mainly, we may not know how much sugar is in a particular item. And so I want to take a look at what this actually looks like in practice. So we took a look at some of the average amounts of sugar that we might consume in things like fizzy drinks. That's about 6 teaspoons. In a can of tinned soup, about 4 teaspoons. Also 5 teaspoons in fat-free yogurt. So you see the fat-free, and then you see how much sugar actually makes up for that. So Malcolm, do people actually know what these teaspoons equal out to and what that means when they're reading the back of these cartons?
Well, probably not, because I don't know what they mean either, but I know it's too much. I think it'd take a step back again, because I suppose people watching this are thinking, well, we're all told that fat's bad for us and saturated fat's bad for us, and now these guys are saying carbohydrates are bad for us. You can end up in a situation where people think, well, everything can't be bad for us. What's left? Are we going to chew on tables? But I think that you have to go back and say, well, where did all this start? Why did the demonization of fat start? Because that triggered the whole carbohydrate movement, if you like. And I know that Gary obviously knows this. I'm sure everybody, all 4 of us know this. It started in America in the 1950s, really, when a man called Ansel Keys basically said he knows what causes heart disease and unhealthiness, and that's fat. And once that was established, then of course people said, well, what do we eat apart from fat? And the answer was, well, there's only really one other foodstuff that you're going to replace it with, and that's carbohydrates. So when you get all this low-fat food, so low-fat yogurt just means high-sugar yogurt. Low-fat anything just means high-sugar anything. And they have to put in an awful lot of sugar to replace the taste, because people love the taste of fat, cream. These are things that people like to eat. So if you're going to get rid of it, you have to just pile sugar in, and then everyone thinks, oh, this is healthy. It's the exact opposite of healthy. And we have got ourselves into a position, as I say to everyone when I speak to them about this area, everything you've been told is good for you is bad for you, and everything you've been told is bad for you is good for you. And if you work on that principle, you'll probably be fine.
So we have something just on that.
To go along with that, the biggest fallacy in weight loss in the weight industry is all things in moderation. And what does that even mean? What does moderation mean? If you're obese, you're probably not doing anything in moderation. So I think it's important to really get awareness around what you're putting in your body, how much sugar you're eating, how many carbs, like what you're ingesting, and what actually is moderation and how your body reacts to that.
But specifically on knowing what you're putting in your body, we have people in our online community who are talking about reading these labels. We have Observer here who says, I read, but I have no idea about some abbreviations which makes me nervous. And then we have
probably if you don't know how to pronounce it, you shouldn't be eating it.
Yeah, we have D. Said here who also follows up by saying, I haven't known most of the different names of sugar that you've listed. Which of these are less harmful? Gary, if I toss this to you, just is there anything that people can be on the lookout for in the backs of these packages that is particularly harmful or helpful?
Well, there is in the United States. There is a level on you can look at the sugars on the label. It doesn't differentiate between whether they're added sugars or naturally occurring sugars, although we're not sure it makes that much difference. Something Malcolm said: if something has a health claim on the label, unless it's water, it's probably got sugar added to it and fat removed, and that's what makes it a health claim. So in general, you want to just, most of these sugars are probably the same in terms of how we respond to them biochemically. And the key point, again, that Malcolm made is that these sugars, it's not so much, the concept of eating too much sugar is almost meaningless, because what they do is they set up a particular hormonal environment in your body that works to store calories, apparently works to store calories as fat and to make you fatter and to create this condition known as insulin resistance, which we now know to underlie or be the primary defect in type 2 diabetes and in heart disease. There's significant evidence that it's sugar that causes hypertension and not the salt in our diets. And again, what happens, people like me start talking about sugar, we begin to appear like food faddists because we want to blame everything on sugar. But the reality is, if you look at how chronic diseases have emerged in populations over the past century, there's this cluster of chronic diseases that includes obesity, diabetes, heart disease, hypertension, and that all pretty much appear in populations and in patients together. And there are mechanisms by which sugar can cause all of them.
And Gary, it's interesting you mentioned that, because I want to internationalize this. Of course, this is not just a problem in the West or in developed nations. Take a look at this graph. This is from the Global Nutrition Report, which was released earlier this month. And I love the title because it says, think your country doesn't have a nutrition problem, think again. So on this side, you see obesity levels. 1.9 billion people out of adults are overweight or obese, and that really encompasses pretty much the entire world. On this side, you see, although you have that obese level, 2 billion people don't get enough vitamins or minerals, and so they're malnutrition or undernutritioned. Ishi, what does this mean for developing countries and countries that are clearly facing a problem here, but then the options that they might have are fast food, foods with sugars, high levels of sugar and high levels of fat?
Yes, absolutely. And actually, countries like us in transition are facing a double burden, where we are having the burden of malnutrition along with overnutrition, and both, as we were talking about earlier, that micronutrient deficiencies or malnutrition has been linked to developing diabetes and heart disease as much as overnutrition. So we do, and we see both sides of the spectrum. We are seeing anemia, we are seeing vitamin D deficiencies, and we are seeing a whole lot of other nutritional deficiencies, protein deficiencies, which are ultimately translating into a burden of heart disease and diabetes that we were talking about, the metabolic syndrome. And so we have, a lifestyle changing, or a very rapidly changing lifestyle among the middle class. And the kind of food that they're taking much more processed food. The wheat is much more refined, the rice is more refined, there's far more sugar in our diets. And, the wrong fats, the trans fats, etc., are also equally a part of our diet. And so to tackle both, and we are actually getting it from both sides. So I think for us, it's a far more urgent call. And if you look at the Asian population, South Asian population, and particularly in India, we have a genetic predisposition which is many times higher to developing type 2 diabetes. So, it's something which we need to really look at far more closely than anywhere else in the world.
But for our audience that is watching this issue, because I do want to give a little bit of hope, I want to pull up this tweet. This is Excess Matters. This is Brooke. Brooke, you tweeted this not too long ago. 30 days without sugar and starch. So it is possible. Brooke, tell us what your do's and don'ts are to make this happen, this 30 days without sugar and starch.
All right. So first of all, that's about 5 years in the making of changing my diet. And really, for me, I knew that sugar and flour were a problem for quite a long time, and I had gone periods of time without them in my diet and had tremendous success. But I think someone struggling with obesity for a lifetime and having most likely insulin resistance and metabolic syndrome, I had to look at, even though I cut out flour and sugar, it would get down to beans and cheese, or like things that were carbohydrates that for me in particular were triggering binge eating, triggering me to want to continue to eat. And so that's the reason I made the choice to eliminate all carbohydrate or all starchy carbohydrates. I do eat a lot of green leafy vegetables. So I think the biggest place to start is kind of counterintuitive. I think it's super important to add green vegetables into your diet. It gives you something to sort of replace and add to your meal, so that when you are feeling willing to stop eating sugar and stop eating some of the highly refined carbohydrates, you have a healthy source of nutrients in your diet. So that's where I would start. And also just having awareness, just writing down everything that you're eating and being real with yourself, because the very nature of addiction is that we lie to ourselves and we justify the things that we're eating and the things that we're doing because we're addicted. So I think getting honest with yourself and what you're eating is the most important first step. And once you've decided that you want to try to let go of sugar or starch or any of these things, just start experimenting and seeing what your experience is like. Most people are going to feel terrible when they cut sugar out of their diet because they're going to have withdrawals.
Right.
So
just like a true drug.
Yep. And we have people who are just talking about responsibility here. We have Roger on Google Plus who says, the food companies know that's a factor, but lack of self-control and bad consumer choices are far more significant factors. Malcolm, we're running out of time. Just in 20 seconds, what do you answer people who do say that this is about personal responsibility, not about the company's behavior?
Well, I think I'd answer that in 1980 in the West, the rates of obesity and diabetes started to skyrocket. That was exactly the time when the guidelines came out saying, eat more carbohydrates. So I think we can see direct cause and effect here. People didn't become lazy and greedy and lack self-control in 1980. What happened was the guidelines changed.
The guidelines changed. So could you give us in can you give us in about a sentence, Malcolm, your don't for when we go to the grocery store?
Stay away from almost all the aisles except for the stuff that looks like real food that your grandmother or grandfather would recognize and you might see coming off the ground.
I love that. And Gary is smiling as you said that. We're going to get more do's and don'ts in the post show. We're out of time now. We'll see you there. Stream.aljazeera.com. Welcome back. We're discussing the food industry and the toll sugar takes on our health. We're going to get right back to that conversation. We ended with a don't from Malcolm on what to do or what not to do when you go to the grocery store. Malcolm, pick up where you left off.
Well, I was just saying that, you know, in the UK, I think all the stuff I would call healthy is on the left-hand side when you go in a supermarket, and all the unhealthy stuff's on the right-hand side. Basically, when you enter, you've got fruit, well, fruit in moderation, vegetables, fish, meat, all these unprocessed foods that look like food. As you move further over in the supermarket, everything gets more and more processed, and more things and sugars that you've never even heard of are in these foods. And so if you're reading the ingredients list and you think, it's taken me 5 minutes and I haven't got to the end yet, then probably put it down, move away, don't eat it, go to the other side and say, oh, this looks like food, I'm going to eat that. That would kind of be a very simple way of looking at it in my world.
Right, and as you're talking, Gary was nodding, Brooke was nodding. Gary, what are you thinking?
Well, I was thinking of Michael Pollan's mantra, one of which I agree with 100%, which is eat food. So if it vaguely looks like something that came out of the ground or was raised on a farm, then it's probably a good idea to eat it. I do think that the key here, if you're healthy now, meaning if you're lean and you're not pre-diabetic, then just giving up sugar and sugary beverages is probably the smartest thing to do. If you're overweight and obese or diabetic, then
but Gary, I have to pause you there, Gary, because you said just giving up sugar or sugary drinks, but isn't the problem if we don't know that the sugar is there, that it is hard to then give it up?
But
yeah,
I think
that's a problem.
Sorry.
That's
it's important to make the
Gary, go ahead, and then we'll get Brooke.
Sorry.
Gary, go ahead. It's okay. Gary, finish.
No, okay. I mean, it's true. You know, it's one of the questions we always have from a scientific perspective is when people, for instance, a lot of people give up, they think they give up gluten and that makes them healthy, but when they give up gluten, they give up processed foods, and the processed foods have all the refined grains. With or without gluten, they've got all the sugar in it. So there's always this question so if you target sugary beverages, then you're pretty much getting rid of sugar and nothing else. If you target anything with sugar in it, which are all the processed foods Malcolm talked about in the center aisles of the supermarket, then you're giving up not just sugar, but all this other refined grains as well. We would argue you're assuredly going to be healthier. The point Malcolm made is interesting, that because we've been so fat phobic for the past 50 years, when you give up sugar, you have to replace it with something. And when you give up sugar and grains, you have to replace it. One alternative, as Brooke suggested, is green vegetables, and the other is, for lack of, animal products, which, while not particularly healthy for the animals, could be healthier for us. So there's a lot of issues that have to be worked out because the science of nutrition missed the sugar story for 50 years, and instead we're living with all this other baggage they got wrong.
So, Brooke, I know you want to jump in here, but I do have a question for you also that has come in from community that you can maybe answer together. We have GJ Dempers here on Facebook who says, life has become such a rush that when it comes to preparing food, we want a quick fix. Pop it in the oven, pop it in the microwave, or even worse, get fast food. Just curious, do you think that there's a way to do food fast through a microwave that is still healthy? Or if you're trying to get food that fast, then you're inherently going to be going through methods where the food is actually not going to be that good for you?
Actually, if you learn to cook, you can usually prepare a meal faster than you will be able to sit in the fast food line or order takeout. So I think it's a common misconception that cooking your own food is not fast, because if you go shopping once a week and you have once you kind of learn those skills, it's actually far easier and quicker to prepare a meal at home than go out and get something.
So Ishi, I want to bring you back in here. Go ahead, Malcolm. Malcolm, let me just go to Ishi because I know she's been waiting patiently, and then we'll get to you, Malcolm. But Ishi, I wanted to bring you back in here because you're hearing this. You heard the advice. For our international audience that's listening, what would you describe as a healthy diet?
Yeah, before we get there, I just thought I was very tempted to mention what really should be the goal with respect to sugar. Well, if somebody it can go zero sugar or extremely low sugar, I think it's fantastic. But I'm not sure how many people can actually realistically achieve this. I think the focus should be on using treats, in using the sugary foods which we are typically used to only as indulgence foods and treats once in a while. But more than that, I think a lot of people would want a sweet fix maybe at least once a day, if not twice. And that means you need to look out for healthier options. And let's distinguish between sugar, as the way we are talking about, and the unrefined sugar. As in India particularly, we have jaggery. We have, the palm sugar and the date. This is basically unprocessed sugar. It's almost like molasses. And, of course, we have honey all over the world. We also have dried fruits and fresh fruits as sources of sugar, which also provide valuable nutrients.
Right.
So let's keep the white sugar as empty calories as completely a different issue, and these forms of sugar, let's address them a little more differently, and let's not ban those, because I think they have a certain place in our diet, and they should be counted in the sugar calories. But they can be given to a person who really, even if he's diabetic or fighting a weight problem, without any risk of addiction or sugar craving. So I think that would be my take on sugar. And so let's distinguish between, first of all, the amount and both are important. How much you have of that, and what form of sugar you're having.
Right. And Brooke, I hear you piping up, but I paused Malcolm, so I need to hear what Malcolm had to say. Malcolm.
Oh.
Well, I'd say if you're having to cook and eat your food that fast, you're doing something wrong in your life. And you phoned me up earlier tonight and said you want to come on the show, and I said fine. And in between that time, I cooked a chicken stew, which is bubbling away nicely. And in food and how you eat it, and getting people around a table and eating and enjoying food, this is an absolutely essential part of human existence. And trying to just turn it into a refueling thing where we do it as quickly as possible, and it's all about ingredients and nutrition. I think how we interact with the food, how our physiologies are ready to eat the food, eating with friends, having a conversation, eating with your family. These are hugely important things. We move away from this. You see societies that move away from this, and their health goes down the drains.
Malcolm, I do have a follow-up question for you from a former stream member here, Wojtek, who loves beer and is a little concerned, is asking, is beer included when you mention sugary beverages?
Well, not in my world, it's not, no. But however, of course, it probably is, I'm afraid to say. I think don't go mad. I mean, people, we don't want to become fanatics. We don't want to become zealots here. As Gary said, we need to eat different foods. Clearly, people run into problems. The really biggest problem time for people is the people who have real problems are people who already have diabetes. These people really are running into trouble. These people have been told for the last 30 years, you must eat sugar, basically, which is completely insane. But for other people, my son's sitting next door, he's 6'2". He is so thin you can't believe it. He will sit and eat packets of biscuits. I look at him in total terror. I said, if I ate that, I would be the size of this planet. So people do react differently as well. So I think we have to be a little bit careful. We don't. Sorry,
Brooke.
I just think it's important to make the distinction that everyone is going to have their own level of being able to ingest sugar. Just like he was saying, his son can eat all those biscuits or cookies and stay super thin. Someone who's obese can't do that. And the biggest thing is that you need to really be honest with yourself and look at yourself, because no one can tell you what's right for you other than you.
And perhaps your doctor, Brooke. Perhaps your doctor.
And your doctor. There's a lot of misinformation being given out by doctors.
Of course. I want to give the last word to Gary, because we haven't heard from Gary in a bit before we wrap up, because we're out of time. But Gary, give us your closing thought.
Well, I just wanted to point out that you had shown a slide earlier about skinny fat and people who are lean but have what's called visceral fat accumulation. They might have fatty liver. They might be insulin resistant, and so they're at higher risk for diabetes, heart disease, and maybe to become obese in the future as well. So it's one thing for the obese and overweight to look at themselves and say, I should be eating less sugar, but for many of us, we don't know. We still seem to be perfectly healthy on the outside, And then the question is, what do we have to do to stay healthy? And even Malcolm's envious son, you have to wonder what kind of damage is being done by the excessive biscuit consumption. So we have to make a choice between how zealous we're going to become, how zealous we want to be about this, and how healthy we want to be, and how healthy we want to stay. And that's a line that we all will draw differently.
Right. Wise words. And Malcolm will warn his son. That's all the time we have for today's show. I want to thank all of my guests, Gary Taubes, Brooke Barnett, Ishi Khosla, and Dr. Malcolm Kendrick. I want to give the very last word, though, to our community who've been weighing in. Omar.
I'll leave you with this word on Facebook from Juan, who says, Big Food controls how policymakers define the term healthy. As long as they exert political power at the macro level, micro-level attempts to change, such as diets and campaigns and personal responsibility, will be futile.
Thanks for weighing in, and thanks for joining us. See you next time.